The rain lashed against the cobblestones, a relentless drumbeat drowning out the world. At 86, Eleanor Voss stood alone outside the gilded doors of the Grand Meridian Hotel, her frail frame trembling under a threadbare coat. She clutched a tattered suitcase, its leather cracked like the lines etched deep into her weathered face. Eleanor's eyes, sharp and unyielding despite her age, fixed on the young concierge who barred her way. "No vacancies," he'd said, his voice clipped, his gaze sliding over her like she was a ghost. The hotel's golden lights spilled onto the wet street, mocking her with their warmth, but Eleanor didn't budge. She hadn't come this far to be turned away. 50 years ago, this very hotel had been her world. The Grand Meridian wasn't just a building. It was a stage where Eleanor Voss, once Ellie Varnum, had sung her heart out to crowds of adoring fans. In the 1960s, her voice rich, soulful, raw had filled its ballroom, drawing tears and applause from the elite who sipped champagne under crystal chandeliers. She'd been a star, a comet blazing across the city's nightlife, until the world turned and her light faded. Now, at 86, she was a stranger to the place she'd once owned with her songs. The concierge, barely out of his teens, didn't know her name. To him, she was just an old woman, soaked and shivering, with no business in a five-star hotel. "Ma'am, you need to leave," he repeated, his tone sharper now, as if her presence offended the polished marble behind him. Eleanor's lips twitched into a faint smile. "I'm not here for a room," she said softly, her voice carrying a melody even time couldn't steal. "I'm here for what's mine." The concierge frowned, confused, but before he could respond, a gust of wind tore through the street, nearly knocking Eleanor off her feet. She steadied herself, gripping the suitcase tighter. Inside it was everything she had left: a few faded photographs, a yellowed newspaper clipping, and a single key, small, brass, and heavy with secrets. She'd carried that key for decades, ever since the night she'd left the Grand Meridian for good. It wasn't just any key. It unlocked a safe in the hotel's basement, one she'd never told anyone about, not her manager, not her lovers, not even her daughter, who'd grown up believing her mother was just a dreamer who'd never made it big. The safe held proof of who she was, and more importantly, proof of what she'd lost. Back then, the hotel's owner, Marcus Langston, had been her biggest fan and her greatest betrayer. He'd promised her the world, booked her for every major event, whispered dreams of a recording contract. But when her star began to wane, when younger singers with flashier styles emerged, Marcus had cast her aside. Worse, he'd cheated her out of her earnings, claiming her performances were charity for the hotel's prestige. The safe, she'd later discovered, held the original contract's documents that could prove he'd stolen her royalties, her legacy. Eleanor had been too broken to fight then. She'd fled the city, raised her daughter in a small town, and buried her past. But now, with her daughter gone and her own days numbered, she'd returned. She wasn't here for revenge. She was here for justice. The concierge, whose name tag read Tyler, crossed his arms. "Lady, I don't know what you're talking about, but you can't stay here. You're scaring the guests." Eleanor's eyes flickered with something fierce. "Scaring them? Son, I've faced worse than a few raised eyebrows." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Tell your manager I'm here about the safe in room B12. Tell him Ellie Varnum sent me." Tyler's smirk faltered. The name didn't mean anything to him, but the certainty in her tone did. He hesitated, then muttered, "Wait here," before disappearing inside. Eleanor stood in the rain, her heart pounding. She hadn't said that name Ellie Varnum in years. It felt like summoning a ghost. As she waited, memories flooded back. The roar of the crowd, the weight of a microphone in her hand, the way Marcus's smile had turned cold when he'd handed her a pittance for a year's worth of performances. She'd been naive then, trusting a man who saw her as a means to an end. But she wasn't naive now. Minutes later, Tyler returned with an older woman in a crisp blazer. Marissa, the night manager. Her face was all business, but her eyes widened slightly when she saw Eleanor. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but we don't have any record of a safe in room B12. And Ellie Varnum? That's not a name I know." Eleanor's smile didn't waver. "You wouldn't, but your grandfather did. Marcus Langston built this hotel on my voice, and I'm here to take back what he stole." Marissa's expression shifted, a flicker of unease crossing her features. She didn't know the name, but she knew her grandfather's reputation. Marcus Langston had been a titan in the hospitality world, but whispers of his ruthless dealings had lingered long after his death. I don't understand, Marissa said cautiously. What exactly are you claiming? Eleanor reached into her suitcase and pulled out the newspaper clipping. It was brittle, the ink faded, but the headline was clear. Ellie Varnum, voice of the Meridian, to perform exclusive gala. Below it was a grainy photo of a young Eleanor, mid-song, her eyes alight with passion. She handed it to Marissa. This is who I was. And that safe holds the contracts that prove your grandfather cheated me out of my life's work. Marissa stared at the clipping, her fingers trembling slightly. The hotel's history was filled with stories of stars who'd performed there, but Ellie Varnum wasn't in any of them. Had her grandfather erased her? The thought sent a chill down her spine. Before she could respond, a new voice cut through the ring. What's going on here? A man in his 60s, dressed in a tailored suit, stepped out from the hotel's entrance. His hair was silver, his posture commanding. Eleanor's breath caught. She hadn't expected him. Richard? She whispered, her voice cracking. Richard Langston, Marcus's son, froze when he saw her. His face paled, as if he'd seen a ghost. Ellie, he said, his voice barely audible. It can't be. The twist was like a knife in Eleanor's chest. Richard had been her friend, her confidant, back when they were young. He'd been the one to warn her about his father's schemes, but he'd been powerless to stop them. She hadn't seen him since the night she'd left, assuming he'd moved on, forgotten her. But here he was, a living relic of her past, standing between her and the truth. The air between Eleanor and Richard crackled with unspoken history. Rain dripped from her coat, pooling at her feet, but she stood taller, her gaze locked on the man who'd once been her ally. Richard Langston, now weathered by time but still carrying the weight of his father's legacy, stared back, his eyes a storm of guilt and recognition. Ellie, he said again, stepping closer. You shouldn't be here. Marissa, still clutching the newspaper clipping, glanced between them, her confusion deepening. You know her? She asked Richard, her voice sharp with suspicion. Richard hesitated, his jaw tightening. She was part of this hotel's history. A long time ago. Eleanor's laugh was bitter, cutting through the rain. Part of its history? I built this place, Richard. My voice filled these halls while your father counted the profits. She pointed at the hotel's gleaming facade. And when I was no longer useful, he threw me out like trash. Marissa's eyes darted to the clipping, then back to Eleanor. The weight of her grandfather's sins was a shadow she'd grown up under. But this was new. If what you're saying is true, she said carefully, why wait until now? Why come back after all these years? Eleanor's gaze softened, but only for a moment. Because I had a daughter to raise. Because I thought I could outrun the past. But the past doesn't let go, Marissa. Not when it owes you something. Richard shifted uncomfortably, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Ellie, the safe, it's gone. My father had it removed years ago. Whatever you're looking for, it's not here. Her heart sank, but she didn't flinch. You're lying, she said quietly. You were always a terrible liar, Richard. He looked away, unable to meet her eyes. The rain seemed to grow heavier, a curtain between them and the truth. Eleanor's mind raced. She'd spent decades imagining this moment, planning every word, but Richard's presence changed everything. He wasn't just a ghost from her pa, that was a complication. Had he known about the safe all along? Had he helped his father bury her legacy? Marissa broke the silence. Let's take this inside, she said, her tone firm but not unkind. You're soaked, and we're not solving anything out here. Eleanor hesitated. Stepping back into the Grand Meridian felt like crossing a threshold she'd sworn never to touch again. But she nodded, clutching her suitcase, and followed them through the gilded doors. The lobby was as opulent as she remembered: marble floors, chandeliers like frozen starlight, the faint hum of wealth in the air. Guests glanced at her, their eyes lingering on her worn clothes, but she didn't care. She was here for one thing only. They led her to a small office behind the reception desk, where the hum of the hotel faded to a murmur. Marissa sat behind a desk cluttered with papers, while Richard stood by the window, his silhouette framed against the storm outside. Eleanor remained standing, her suitcase at her feet like an anchor. Tell me about the safe, Marissa said, folding her hands. What's in it, and why does it matter now? Eleanor took a deep breath, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. It holds contracts. My contracts. Your grandfather promised me royalties for every performance, every recording. He never paid a cent. Those papers prove he stole from hundreds of thousands, maybe more. Enough to change my life, my daughter's life. Marissa's brow furrowed. And you think these contracts are still here? After 50 years. I know they are, Eleanor said. Marcus was too arrogant to destroy them. He thought I'd never come back. Richard turned from the window, his face unreadable. Ellie, you don't understand. My father, he didn't just cheat you. He did it to others, too. Singers, musicians, anyone who brought in crowds. The safe wasn't just for you. The revelation hit Eleanor like a punch. She'd always known Marcus was ruthless, but the scale of his betrayal was staggering. Others? How many dreams had he crushed? How many lives had he rewritten? Her anger flared, but so did her resolve. Then we find it, she said. Not just for me, but for all of them. Marissa leaned back, her expression torn between skepticism and curiosity. If this safe exists, it's not in our records. Room B-12 is a storage closet now. We'd need more than a hunch to start tearing into walls. Eleanor reached into her suitcase and pulled out the brass key, its edges worn but unmistakable. She placed it on the desk with a soft clink. This isn't a hunch. Marissa stared at the key, then at Richard, who looked like he wanted to disappear. You knew about this? She asked him, her voice low. Richard's silence was answer enough. Eleanor's heart twisted. He'd known. All these years, he'd known, and he'd done nothing. The betrayal stung, but she pushed it aside. She hadn't come this far to let old wounds stop her. I'll show you, Eleanor said, standing. Take me to B-12. Marissa hesitated, then nodded. Fine, but if there's nothing there, this ends tonight. They left the office, winding through the hotel's labyrinthine corridors. The deeper they went, the more Eleanor felt the weight of the past pressing down. The basement was dim, the air thick with dust and forgotten things. Room B-12 was unmarked, its door rusted at the hinges. Marissa unlocked it, revealing a cluttered space filled with old furniture and boxes. Eleanor's eyes scanned the walls, searching for a sign. The safe was hidden, Marcus had told her that much. She ran her fingers along the bricks, her hands trembling not from age but from anticipation. Then she felt a faint seam, barely visible. Here, she whispered. Richard stepped forward, his voice hoarse. Ellie, stop. You don't know what you're opening. She turned to him, her eyes blazing. I know exactly what I'm opening, Richard. The question is, why are you so afraid of it? The brick wall in room B-12 seemed to pulse under Eleanor's touch, as if it held the heartbeat of her stolen past. She pressed harder against the seam, her fingers tracing the outline of a hidden panel. Richard's warning hung in the air, but she ignored it, her resolve ironclad. Marissa, standing behind her, shone a flashlight on the wall. This is insane, she muttered, but there was a spark of curiosity in her eyes. She handed Eleanor a small crowbar from a nearby toolbox. If you're sure, go ahead, but I'm not liable for whatever happens. Eleanor's hands shook as she wedged the crowbar into the seam. The bricks groaned, dust cascading like a sigh from the past. With a final heave, the panel gave way, revealing a small, rusted safe embedded in the wall. The brass key in her pocket felt heavier than ever. Richard stepped forward, his face pale. Ellie, please. You don't know what else is in there. She turned to him, her voice low but fierce. What are you hiding, Richard? What did your father make you carry? He flinched, his eyes darting to the floor. Marissa, sensing the tension, frowned. What's he talking about? She asked Eleanor. Ask him, Eleanor said, nodding toward Richard. He was there when your grandfather ruined me. He knows more than he's saying. Marissa's gaze hardened as she turned to Richard. Is that true? Did you know about this safe? Richard's shoulders slumped, the weight of decades pressing down. I didn't know everything, he said quietly, but I knew enough. My father, he didn't just cheat Ellie. There were other singers, dancers, even staff. He kept records of it all, locked away so no one could touch him. Eleanor's breath caught. The safe wasn't just her salvation, it was a Pandora's box of Marcus Langston's sins. She inserted the key, her hand steady now, and turned it. The lock clicked, and the door swung open with a groan. Inside was a stack of papers, yellowed but intact, bound with a faded ribbon. Eleanor's heart raced as she pulled them out. The top document was her contract, her signature bold and youthful, next to Marcus's scrawl. Below it were others' names she recognized, voices she'd shared stages with, all betrayed by the same man. But there was something else. A small, leather-bound journal, its pages brittle. Eleanor opened it, and her blood ran cold. It was Marcus's handwriting, detailing not just financial theft, but blackmail, threats, even worse. He destroyed lives, not just livelihoods. Her hands trembled as she read a passage about a young dancer, Clara, who'd vanished after a gala. The implication was chilling. Marissa, peering over her shoulder, gasped. This can't be real. My grandfather was ruthless, but this? It's real, Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. And it's why I came back. Richard sank into a chair, his face ashen. I tried to stop him, he said, his voice breaking. I was just a kid, Ellie. I couldn't. You could have tried harder, she snapped, but her anger softened as she saw the pain in his eyes. Richard had been trapped, too, a son caught in his father's shadow. Before they could process more, a new voice echoed from the doorway. What the hell is going on here? A young woman, no older than 30, stood there, her arms crossed. She wore a staff uniform, but her posture was defiant, her eyes sharp with suspicion. Marissa, you're tearing apart the basement. Marissa turned, startled. Lila, what are you doing down here? Lila's gaze landed on Eleanor, then the safe. I heard voices. Thought someone was breaking in. Her eyes narrowed. Who's she? Eleanor met Lila's stare, recognizing something in her anger, maybe, or a hunger for truth. I'm Eleanor Voss, she said, and I'm here to right a wrong. Lila's expression shifted, a flicker of recognition. Voss, like Ellie Varnum. She stepped closer, pulling a phone from her pocket. I've heard of you. My grandma used to talk about your shows. She was a maid here, said you were the best thing this place ever had. Eleanor's heart skipped. A connection, unexpected and raw, from someone who'd known her through stories. Your grandmother, she said softly. What was her name? Clara, Lila said, her voice catching. Clara Hayes. The room went silent. The name from Marcus's journal hung between them like a specter. Eleanor's hands tightened around the papers. Lila's grandmother hadn't just been a maid, she'd been one of Marcus's victims. Lila, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. These papers, they might tell us what happened to her. Lila's eyes widened, then hardened with resolve. Then let's read them. All of them. They spread the documents on a dusty table, each page a piece of the hotel's dark history. Eleanor's contracts were there, but so were others, proof of stolen wages, forged signatures, even threats against those who dared to speak out. Clara's name appeared again, tied to a payment to silence her after an incident. Lila's hands shook as she read, tears welling but not falling. Marissa, her face pale, looked at Richard. Did you know about this? About Clara? Richard shook his head, but his silence felt heavy, incomplete. Eleanor didn't press him, not yet. She was focused on Lila, whose anger was a mirror of her own. We'll make this right, Eleanor told her. For Clara. For all of them. Lila nodded, her jaw set. I'm in. Whatever it takes. The safe had opened more than Eleanor had expected. It wasn't just her fight, Anna Marie, it was theirs. The dusty air of room B12 felt charged, as if the ghosts of the past were watching. Eleanor, Lila, Marissa, and Richard stood around the table, the safe's contents spread before them like a map of buried sins. Eleanor's heart pounded, not just for herself, but for Lila, whose grandmother's name was now a wound laid bare. Lila's fingers traced Clara's name on a yellowed page, her voice trembling but fierce. She never talked about this place after she left. Just said it broke her. Now I know why. She looked at Eleanor, her eyes blazing. What do we do with this? Eleanor met her gaze, feeling the weight of their shared purpose. We expose it, she said. All of it. Marcus Langston's legacy ends tonight. Marissa hesitated, her loyalty to her family's name warring with the truth. This could ruin the hotel, she said quietly. My grandfather's gone, but this is still our business. My family's name. Your family's name was built on lies, Lila snapped, her voice cutting through the tension. My grandmother cleaned your floors, and your grandfather destroyed her. You don't get to protect that. Marissa flinched, but didn't argue. Eleanor saw the conflict in her eyes: shame, guilt, but also a flicker of resolve. "You're right," Marissa said finally. "If this is true, we can't hide it." Richard, silent until now, spoke up, his voice hoarse. "It's true. I didn't know the details, but I saw enough. My father, he was a monster." He looked at Eleanor, his eyes pleading. "I tried to help you, Ellie. I swear I did. But I was weak." Eleanor's anger softened, but only slightly. "You were weak," she said. "But you're here now. Help us make it right." Richard nodded, his shoulders sagging as if unburdening a lifetime of guilt. "What do you need?" "We need to verify these documents," Eleanor said. "And we need to find anyone else who was hurt. There are names here, people who might still be out there, or families like Lila's who deserve answers." Lila pulled out her phone, snapping photos of the documents. "I know people," she said. "Journalists, activists. My cousin runs a blog about the city's history. We can get this out. Make sure no one forgets." Marissa nodded, her decision made. "I'll help. I have access to the hotel's records, old ledgers, anything that might corroborate this. But we need to be careful. If this gets out before we're ready, it could be chaos." Eleanor's lips curved into a faint smile. Chaos is what Marcus feared most. Let's give it to him. They worked through the night, sorting papers, cross-referencing names, and piecing together a timeline of Marcus's crimes. Eleanor's contracts were the clearest evidence her royalties, meticulously recorded, had been funneled into accounts she'd never seen. But Clara's story was harder to unravel. The journal hinted at an incident at a gala, a confrontation that led to her dismissal and a payoff to keep her quiet. Lila's hands trembled as she read, but she didn't stop. As dawn approached, a new twist emerged. Among the papers was a letter, not in Marcus's handwriting, but in Clara's. It was addressed to Eleanor, dated a month after she'd left the hotel. The words were simple but devastating. "Ellie, I'm sorry. I tried to tell them what he did to you, to us. They threatened my family. I had to leave. Forgive me." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Clara had tried to fight, just as she had. They'd been allies, even if they'd never known it. She handed the letter to Lila, who read it in silence, her face crumpling. "She fought for you," Lila whispered. "All this time, I thought she just gave up." "She didn't," Eleanor said, her voice thick. "And neither will we." By morning, they had a plan. Marissa would dig into the hotel's archives. Lila would contact her network to spread the story, and Richard would reach out to old contacts who might know other victims. Eleanor, though exhausted, felt alive in a way she hadn't in decades. This wasn't just about her Anna Maria, it was about Clara, about the others, about every voice Marcus had silenced. As they left the basement, the first rays of sunlight pierced the hotel's windows, casting long shadows across the lobby. Eleanor paused, looking at the grand staircase where she'd once descended to thunderous applause. The memory was bittersweet, but it no longer hurt. She'd reclaimed her voice, not through song, but through truth. Lila touched her arm. "You're not what I expected," she said. "Grandma always said you were a star, but you're more than that. You're unstoppable." Eleanor smiled, her eyes crinkling. "At 86, you learn a thing or two about not giving up." Marissa, carrying a stack of ledgers, nodded. "We'll do this right. For all of them." Richard lingered behind, his expression heavy but determined. "I'll make amends, Ellie. I owe you that." She looked at him, seeing the boy he'd been, the man he was trying to become. "Then start now," she said. They stepped into the new day, the weight of the past still heavy but no longer crushing. Eleanor clutched her suitcase, lighter now without the key but heavier with purpose. The Grand Meridian's secrets were out, and the world would know.